Okay, welcome everyone to the first of our Island Innovation webinar series. We're so glad to have you join us. I can see over 300 people joining live. We've had over 1,000 people register for this series so far, which is fantastic. My name is James Ellsmoor. I am the founder and director of Island Innovation. We're an organization that works to network internationally between islands and connect different islands to share solutions and resources towards problems and opportunities they're facing. We last year hosted the Virtual Island Summit with over 4,000 participants representing 250 islands, and welcome those stakeholders to join us on a variety of sessions. And of course, like all organizations over the last 2 months, we are pivoting to figure out how do we respond and how do we help to work towards solutions to the current crisis that is taking place. This is the first in our series of 3 webinars. First, we'll have a look at islands internationally and look at some of the commonalities that different islands face. So in this session, we have represented Scotland, Anguilla, Lanzarote and the Canary Islands, which is part of Spain, Greenland and the Maldives. 5 very different places, but that are linked by some of the issues that we will be about to discuss. Some of the reasons that this is important for island communities is that they are affected differently than mainland areas in many respects. Many islands have been fortunate to reduce the impact of the disease by closing their borders early and stopping that reaching their shores. But some of those that were not able to do so were really badly affected early on because of the rapid transmission that can take place in small communities. They also face some issues around suitable medical care and health issues and having adequate health response available to their communities. And so that's what we will be discussing today with our fantastic speakers. I'd encourage you to check out, we'll be sending follow-up emails, but there will be 2 more in this series. Next week at the same time, we'll be looking at a Caribbean case study and looking at how the Caribbean region as a region is responding to this and the issues that are specific to the Caribbean, followed by the 3rd week where we'll be looking specifically at Jamaica and the response in Jamaica. And I know things are moving so quickly and so rapidly, and the news is changing every day. It's difficult to know where we'll be in 2 weeks' time, but we've got great speakers lined up for both of those sessions, including next week, the Director General of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Dr. Didacus Jules, and in the Jamaica case study, N.A.T. Mills, who is the advisor to the Jamaican Prime Minister. I'm just going to launch a poll now, so hopefully you can all see that. And we're really interested to know some of these questions. Can you see the poll that I've just put? Yeah, I can see answers coming in right now. If you'd also like to drop in the chat, just a quick message, who you are, where you're coming from, introduce yourself, feel free to share your LinkedIn profile or website company, for example. And we'd encourage you to really use the chat to network with our participants and the other attendees. And also we have the Q&A box. If you have questions, please make sure you use the Q&A function and not the chat. And after our speakers have spoken, our moderator will be sure to field those questions. So we'll just leave the poll open for a few more seconds and then I'll review those before handing over to our moderator. Okay, ending the poll and sharing the results. So hopefully you can all see those results. You can see that 39% of you are island residents. Interesting, we have a mixture of people and different stakeholders joining. 7 journalists are joining us. We have 22% of people that represent island-based businesses. 12% of you are involved in the travel and tourism sector. That's interesting. 22% with universities and academic institutions, and 24% of you who have joined because you're interested in the topic. The most prominent region is Europe with 33% of people. That may be because of the time zone, closely followed by North America and the Caribbean, each sorry, the Caribbean is 29% in second, and North America is 21%. And understandably, not many of our friends in Asia and Australia Pacific are joining us, as it's the middle of the night there, but I hope they'll be watching on the recording. Okay, so I see the chat is going well, and I'll now hand over to our moderator, who will be fielding the call. Dr. Francesco Sindico is a friend and colleague of mine from the University of Strathclyde Centre for Environmental Law and Governance, based in Glasgow, Scotland. He has led several initiatives in the Scottish Islands, looking at the legislation and the particular responses that are needed there. Most recently, in response to the Islands Bill legislation that was passed in Scotland towards island proofing and making sure that all Scottish legislation meets the needs of the island communities there. We've also recently launched a collaboration with the centre that he runs and Island Innovation, looking to field and collect data from islands around the world towards this crisis and look at how islands are responding. And so part of the idea of this webinar series is to also collect data towards those goals, and Francesco will tell you some more about that. So Francesco, Dr. Sindico, many thanks for joining us today, and I will hand over to you to start the discussion.
Thank you very much, James. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and an honor to moderate such a great group of speakers. I, as James said, work at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow in Scotland. I'm the director of the Strathclyde Centre for Environmental Law and Governance, SCELG. And as James said, we have been collaborating with Scottish Government in the implementation of the Islands of Scotland Act. But the centre does many other things, as you would imagine. We work on many other areas as well: climate change, sustainability, international water law, for example. But in the context of islands, we really focus on law, islands, and sustainability. And as James mentioned, we have started a survey. And in the next few minutes, before I formally introduce our speakers, I want to do three things. The first is to just briefly talk you through the origins and the nature of the survey. I will then share with you the preliminary findings of the survey, and then I will explain how we intend to move forward from this survey. So starting with the origins and the nature. The survey, once the crisis started, was very much developed to better understand island responses to COVID-19. The respondents were a mix of general members of the public, either living on islands or having an interest on islands, researchers, but also, and importantly, wider island-related stakeholders and policymakers. What is the goal of the survey? The survey is really to provide, in particular, island-related stakeholders and policymakers with a tool, with practices, with a tool, with evidence from other islands to help them in their decision making. I mean, let's face it, policymakers and people on islands are taking decisions on a daily basis, and the more evidence, the more practice, the more examples will allow them to make even better decisions. But it's also served a second goal, which is very much about bringing island communities together and realizing that we are really all in this together. Now, in terms of what the survey questions are, I'm sure James can share the survey itself and the webpage of the center on the chat. But really, it was about, when it started, about how has COVID been dealt with, in particular to prevent the spread. So James was mentioning travel restrictions, for example, but also what level of support, not just economic support, but also, for example, for the promotion of the mental well-being of the people on the islands was available on the island. And also some data on infections and, unfortunately, where it has happened, on any fatality. But clearly we are moving already to a second stage. In several islands around the world, we are moving to a phase 2, if we're going to call it like that, where the measures are being relaxed. So the survey has added a further question, which is, how are measures being relaxed on a specific island? So that's where we're moving now. Now, the survey has been open for over 6 weeks. The response has been amazing. We have gotten information and data from islands in over 36 countries, across all oceans of the world. Again, on the website, you can find further information about it. So what are the preliminary findings? So James and I have co-authored a Skelgo policy brief that again can be shared in the chat. And I will just spend a minute or two explaining what is in this policy brief and what are the preliminary findings. James has hinted to the fact that in most cases, unfortunately not all, but in most cases, especially in terms of numbers, let's say, islands have been perceived to some extent as safe havens, although there are some notable exceptions. However, this doesn't mean that they are not fragile, quite the opposite. And unfortunately, we have to be aware that there may well be a second wave. And if there is a second wave, or even in the dealing with this first wave, there are some elements that on islands and on island communities will be particularly fragile. Some of them are the health infrastructure, for example, the lack of testing. Other is the lack on some islands more than others of digital connectivity. For example, here in the UK, the whole idea is to use an app to help us live through the virus. Well, how do you do that if on your island there is a lack or digital connectivity is not very reliable? And also the very same concept of essential worker may well be slightly different in some island contexts. Think of the people operating a ferry, for example. Now, again, as preliminary finding, what we have seen in the survey is that what this really does, it opens up a much needed focus, a much needed discussion on what worked well. And there are a lot of things that have worked well on islands in these first weeks of the pandemic, but also what has been shown to be fragile. And I don't mean fragile as weak. Actually, some of these aspects are very strong and we're at the heart of the economy of some of these islands. But because of the virus, because of COVID, they are now quite fragile. And some of the aspects that have been highlighted by respondents to the survey were, as you would imagine, tourism, food security, but also, for example, the sometimes difficult relationship between the mainland and the island. And this obviously relates more to islands that have a mainland, like the case of Scotland or France and so forth. Finishing with the preliminary findings, what we do feel is that this is a time where we need to some extent, almost like reboot society and not just the economy. And the real issue is how to secure a meaningful input from the island community on how to reshape the society, reshape the economy. And I'll be very curious also from our speakers today to see how we can bring that voice of the island community into this debate. I'll finish with a third point, the way forward. Where are we going with this? Well, until now, Skelgo and Island Innovation captured very raw data, very fascinating, but very raw data. And colleagues at the center, such as Julia Sayeva, Marie Curie Fellow, our two LLM students, Nicola Sharman and Patricia Berlui, have been amazing in capturing the data and helping us putting it into the website. But we want to do something more clearly. We want to go forward and we want to start to assess the data and focus both on island-specific stories and on cross-cutting issues, such as some of the ones I already mentioned, be it tourism, food security, and so forth. So in terms of way forward, we are reaching out to partners, we are seeking funding, but the goal is always the same. The goal is to really provide tools for island-related policymakers and wider island-related stakeholders to inform their decisions going ahead. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what Island Innovation and the Center have been doing. But I now move to present our speakers.
Francesco, I'm just going to jump in here quickly for a little bit of housekeeping. I can see the chat, so many messages coming through. Brazil, Cayman Islands, Mauritius, lots of really interesting messages. Most of you are sending them. You can see there's a blue box above where you type the message. You have the option of either sending to panelists and panelists to attendees. Would really encourage you to check your message and resend it to make sure the other attendees can see it. Otherwise, it's only coming through to the panelists. And I want all of our attendees to benefit from the 100 or so messages that have come through already with people introducing themselves. I can see a couple of questions have also been submitted through the chat. So please, if you do have questions, also make sure you use the Q&A function to submit those. So apologies for the interruption, but just wanted to emphasize that point. Choose the all panelists and attendees option. Thank you.
You're welcome. I will now move on to introduce our 4 speakers. I'll introduce all of them now. I will then give each one of them the floor to present their experiences, their ideas. And once we have the 4 presentations, I will retake the floor and trying to convey as many of the questions that will be laid out by our participants to the webinar. We will have what I'm sure will be a very exciting and interesting conversation. So our first speaker is Vittus Qujaukitsoq. He is the Minister of Finance and Mineral Resources from Greenland. Our second speaker will be Mohamed Raaidh. He is the Managing Director at the Maldives Integrated Tourism Development Corporation. Our third speaker will be Tahirah. She is the partner at Thoughtful Digital Agency in Anguilla. And our last speaker will be Daniel Trigg. He is the president of the Lanzarote Business and Residents Association. I am delighted to have all 4 of you here with us today, and I now give the floor to Minister Vittus Qujaukitsoq.
Thank you for inviting us, sir, to participate in this event. It is great that the government of Greenland is able to share its efforts and experiences of what we've been done to fight against the COVID-19 virus. As you all know, Greenland introduced the lockdown for over 7 weeks ago. And during that time, we experienced 11 cases of infected people being infected by COVID-19. We have been very fortunate that all those 11 incidents were all recovered and doing well. We have not spent the intensive care units in our hospitals in that time. We introduced a lockdown in the entire society of Greenland in order to contain the virus and to avoid the spread of the COVID-19. And it's been a very successful lockdown. We locked down the domestic and the international travel to Greenland and the internal travel in Greenland. We have introduced simple restrictions in order to avoid spreads. And the lockdown has also meant the closing of the businesses altogether. And during the lockdown, the administration of the government have sent all their personnel home, except the most few departments and key figures in our cabinet that has run the country during that time. We introduced an emergency relief package for small businesses, but also to the labor, and introduced relief in tax and toll, a package that contained over $100 million worth package. For the past week, we have eased the lockdown, gradually opening the businesses across Greenland. And it's been a very successful time where we've been able to contain the virus and to avoid the spread of it. Since 2001, we have had an act on contagious diseases, and as late as in February 2020, we introduced an executive order on several measures against infectious diseases, which led to the establishment of an epidemic commission, which was already formed and functioning before the COVID-19 virus came to Greenland. So we've been prepared and been very lucky to have a very skillful staff and a good collaboration between the government agencies and the other agencies fighting against COVID-19, the police force, the healthcare system, social security network, etc., have been working to contain and to avoid the spread. We've had daily news briefings for the public. We have had TV and radio information available for the public, and also make all the materials on how to deal with the COVID-19 available on the internet, etc. So I guess we've been very fortunate. We have a testing available in Greenland. We have a laboratory and equipment and the necessary staff to conduct the testings. We've had a private funding to buy the equipment and the testing machines 2 weeks ago of the donation of private funds, which has made it available for us to do the testings. The COVID-19 has hit our economy very hard, since all branches like the tourism, the transportation, the service branch, food and entertainment business has been hit by the COVID-19 measures and the lockdown. So it's been a very difficult 7 weeks for all of us. But now we experience an ease of those measures, paving the way for a more normal activity in our society. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. That was absolutely fascinating, and it's heartwarming to see the positive developments that you have had in Greenland, that are definitely continuing, and also to know that the lockdown is slowly, carefully, cautiously being relaxed, and that the virus is not spreading up. That is excellent news. So I already saw in the Q&A some questions for the minister, but I will keep them at the end. And I will now move on to our second speaker, which is Mohamed Raaidh, Managing Director at the Maldives Integrated Tourism Development Corporation. Mohamed, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Francesco, and thank you very much, Island Innovation. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, all over the world. Thank you very much once again for giving me the opportunity to speak with such a great webinar and with such great speakers as well. So I have will go on with what Maldives is facing and what we predict and what we need to do it in future. So with this regard, I have done a short presentation. So with the presentation, I think we can move on. I'll share the presentation. Okay, the main topic which was given is islands and the COVID pandemic. I think at first of all, before moving ahead, we all have to agree on a statement that let's work together to combat this pandemic. I think this is something very important. All the governments, all the countries, all the states, whichever, the companies or even in the industries, whether it is tourism or transportation or food industry or whatever industry, everyone is hit very badly, as the Minister Vittus has mentioned. All over the world, this has hit so badly. So we have to all at this moment agree on this statement that we will work together. That is one thing that is very important, and that is the most crucial thing, that we cannot move on different directions to combat this pandemic. So the direction is very clear, the direction is straight, and the direction is single. So either it is a small country or an island nation or a developing country, this statement must be enshrined and agreed by all countries, governments, people, and the citizen. And then Maldives, how we have started, how we are at this moment. Actually, this has started in March 11. That was the first case, and this was in a resort only, and two foreigners that was visiting got positive. And then this came in a very mild way, but the government took immediate actions, but not the total lockdown, but immediate actions were taken. Actually, the actions has been formulating since February, but came up on March 11. That was the first case. And then we experienced our first community outbreak in the mid of April, that is around 15, 16. That was the first case of community outbreak outside the resort islands. So now up until today evening, the current statistics is total. We have 618 positive cases, and among them less than 205 Maldivians and more than 380 foreigners. Foreigners we are counting in terms of number of laborers, because we have quite number of laborers in a station and labor in capital island of Maldives have been congested, but the government is taking stern actions to provide them a better accommodation and facilities where we can control the outbreak. So far, we have experienced 2 deaths. So this is just a brief statistics I have given, and about the Maldivian economy, since this is a webinar all around the world in all walks of life, they are joining. Maldives is an island nation of 1,200 islands, and among them 200 islands people are living as inhabited islands. 132 are developed as luxury resorts. Maldivian economy is mainly depending on, I would say, majorly depending on tourism and fisheries as well. Our GDP is approximately $6.5 billion. Apart from that, 70% is shared in the tourism sector, that is 0.5 billion. So once I'm sure that you would all agree that something which hits so bad, so hardly in the tourism industry, imagine how much the damage, how badly the economy will collapse in a situation like this. So this Maldivian we import majorly everything, just from A to Z, I would say. We have just fish that we need to export. That's the only thing. So going back to the tourism, Maldivian tourism is segmented into 3 major parts, that is luxury tourism, local tourism, and cruise tourism. Luxury tourism, which means that we are very famous for the one island, one resort concept. We have been here in the tourism sector for the last 47 years. And local tourism, which was introduced quite recently in 2010. This is where the people, where the islands, the government gave the permission to have small hotels, motels, or what we call the air. And then the third is the cruising, where we have quite a number of cruisers visiting, but majorly into 3 different areas of the country, that is the southern and the mid and the northern part of the country. So among this, actually MITDC is majorly into local tourism or development of local tourism. I'll go into how MITDC was formed in end of 2016 for the development of local tourism and giving the needed or the required assistance. MITDC is a 100% government company. So I will, we have been in this tourism for the last 47 years, but as I have said that Maldives, being as a luxury destination, there are things that has been expecting by the tourists, that someone visiting the Maldives, there are expectations. For example, if you give a packet of chocolate to somebody, and if you give a luxury brand of chocolate, the packaging and how it is presented, those things matter. So the same thing applies to the tourism industry in the Maldives. Since I do not consider Maldives in number 2 or number 3, we are number 1. So for this reason, we have to have certain standards, certain auxiliary services that is required, even though you come to a resort or even though you come to a small motel. There are expectations. Those expectations need to be fulfilled. So in terms of that, this is where MITDC comes into the picture. We have identified islands where there are small guest houses, where MITDC does not go into the luxury tourism, meaning to say the resorts. So if there is an island which have a few guest houses, but does not have the auxiliary services that is required for the tourists, for example, a good restaurant, a good spa, a good water sport facility, a good dive center, these things are required. Because somebody coming to the Maldives, very few, I think if you look into the Instagram or Facebook, if you come to the Maldives, very few will just mention the exact name of the island or the resort that they have said. All what they would say is, I stayed in the Maldives. I came to Maldives. Maldives is the brand. So whether you come to a luxury resort or an island, these things, these services need to be there. This is the expectation. Even with the new normal, these things will come into effect more. So, for example, I have taken HA.Hoarafushi because HA.Hoarafushi is one of our pilot projects that is in the northern part of the country. So this is, we are going, MITDC will develop a zone with integrated tourism facilities. Meaning to say it will have several guest houses, water sports, spa, and gymnasium. So the guest houses within the island community or the Airbnb services, for example, they will be able to enjoy the services that has been provided within the tourism zone. So this is something that we are trying to introduce, and this is the model of MITDC in future, how in collaborating within the industry. Okay, looking into the top market, this is the end of 2009. If you can see that our major markets, number 1 is China in terms of single country. The next comes India, Germany, Italy, UK, Russia, France, US, Japan, and Australia. So if you look into the region, okay, Europe will be in number 1, but if you look into the single countries, the number of arrivals, the highest is China, and we see an increase of 0.3% growth last year. The biggest growth we have seen is from India with an 83%, and from Italy, 29% growth was there. And looking at the arrivals, we have enjoyed by the end of 2019, we have enjoyed 1.7 million visitors with an increase of 14%. And 2020 January, we have had 177,000 visitors. So this is the updated data that we have received from the Ministry of Tourism. So looking at the economic impact, borders, we have closed the borders with early in the mid of March. And then the unemployment of workers was forced, because all the resorts were forced to shut down. All the government, we have closed down on the March of 19th, and most of the restaurants, cafes, all these economic activities were at halt. And migrant workers, we have approximately 177,000 foreign workers. Among them, 63% are from Bangladesh. The next is highest is from India with 16%. Majorly, our construction industry is with the highest number of expatriate workers. The construction industry is also at halt. 70,000 expat workers are there. Tourism, 20% of the expat are working in the tourism industry. So in the resorts, we see a local of Maldivian, 45,000 Maldivians working in the resort industry. And our unemployment rate is approximately at 6.4%, total labor force of 151,000. Maldivian total labor. So we have a population of approximately 390,000. Among that, 151 is in the total labor force, and employed is 142,000. So that means 94% of an employment rate. So from the World Bank also, the recent report, they have mentioned that Maldivian economy is one of the worst and will be badly hit. So this is, we should not be in a position to demoralize on a statement like this, but this will be something that we need to take extra precautionary measures and extra effort to fight together to overcome the situation.
Mohamed, I'm extremely sorry to interrupt you. If you could just come to some sort of a conclusion in the next minute or two, because in the interest of time, so we can give space also to the other speakers. Thank you very much, Mohamed.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, I'll just quickly go through the scenarios and also the new normals. If you could give me just 3-4 minutes more. The scenarios which the government has mentioned or announced is there are 5 scenarios that we could be able to open May or June or July, October or January. So I think the best scenario, what we could come up with, scenario 3, we will be able to open up on July, and also that the arrivals may start from November, because normally the Maldivian tourism industry, the tourism segment, from November to February is our peak season. So we expect that to be, even though if we open on July also, we expect the arrivals to start from November. So, okay, these are the things that I would quickly go to as the new normals that we would, if you want to keep into this industry live and keep on moving. For example, the number one thing is the virtual Maldives. This is something that is very important, because all this while we have been participating and advertising Maldives in the fairs, and where a lot of people are coming together on one area or one building. But the virtual is the social media is now the new norm. So this is one thing that we would like to have in the future. And also advanced health facilities in the resorts. Now also we have a lot of, even every resort will have an in-house doctor, but still more health facilities that is required by the tourists now when they want to come. And there are some new things that they wanted to ask when they make a booking. For example, how is the temperature check? How is the sanitation? How you have the mask, you have the gloves. So these are the things that the WHO standards. And Maldivian resorts are just one island, one resort. So easily it can be locked down, or even the rooms can be changed into an isolation. So these more advanced health facilities needs to be established in luxury resorts. And also the next thing is the development of medical infrastructure. We expect to have, we have 200 islands, but the government could be thinking of developing developing medical infrastructure in zones where, because guest house tourism is being developed so rapidly, and guest houses are being developed in all parts of the country. So these things, the zones must be identified and developed actually. And now the new health visa, which is very common, I think all over the world, we will expect something like this with your passport, a health visa or something that you are able to travel. You come from a safe zone. The airport health screen, aviation is the most badly hit industry. We have to have a proper check in the airports. Even from the today's media, also we have seen the Maldivian Malé International Airport, the Velana International Airport is being. They have started to upgrade and install more health screening facilities, sanitization gates, and things like this will come into as new normal. And also, I would say that the aeroplanes, they will install more screening, more cleaning facilities in the near future.
Mohamed, I'm really, really sorry, but we need to bring it to a close. Some of the points that you're mentioning are already in the questions, and I'm sure there'll be time in the conversation we'll have afterwards to pick up on them. Okay?
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I'm really sorry for that.
Thank you, Mohamed. Okay, so now let's move to our third speaker. Our third speaker is Tahirah Banks. Hello, Tahirah. She is partner at Thoughtful Digital Agency in Anguilla. The floor is yours, Tahirah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Francesco. And I want to thank yourself again and James and the entire team at Island Innovation for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. So my name is Tahirah Banks, as I shared, and I am a partner at Thoughtful Digital Agency. We are a digital marketing agency based here in Anguilla. I'm going to drop the link to our website right here in the discussion. But our agency actually worked with the government of Anguilla to manage the island's response to COVID-19. So I think what's important is to start with where we are today. So where we are today positively is that we have 0 active cases of COVID-19 on the island in Anguilla. We have 3 recovered cases, we have 0 active cases, and that is actually a great space for us to be in. The government has already begun de-escalation measures, but we're not falling into the trap of complacency. And so we still have air and ocean patrols ongoing. We're still adhering to the global standards, social distancing, and the other precautions that were put in place by the World Health Organization and other international bodies. And we're taking our time, in rolling out the de-escalation and in pulling ourselves back to a place of normalcy. What I think is important as well, though, is to talk about how we got to this place, how we got to where we are today in Anguilla, where we are returning to some semblance of what we thought was normal. So beating COVID-19, we knew from the onset that beating COVID-19 required a dual approach in both medicine and messaging. We thought that that was really important. And I know in the early stages of the pandemic, I think even before it was actually labeled a pandemic, in the early stages, we woke up one Sunday morning and someone had actually spread a really nasty WhatsApp with very malicious and false information about the status of things here on the island. And that then transitioned to Facebook and phone calls, and it was a full-blown panic. And on an island like Anguilla, where it's 35 square miles and it's 13,000 people on a good day, panic sets in really quick and bad news spreads really fast. So what we did was we connected with the Ministry of Health and Social Development on developing a platform that could serve as the central space for all information related to COVID-19 and Anguilla. Official information from just about every ministry of government, health, finance, education, labor, tourism, they're all present on there. And I'm going to use the opportunity in the next minute or so to briefly walk you through it. But what we wanted to ensure was that key stakeholders in the community, everybody had a presence on the platform, and that it was the opportunity to give our people the access to the information they needed to make informed decisions. What we also thought was very important, though, in developing the platform was that we removed what for most governments would be the biggest barrier to making a decision, and that was the cost to develop the platform. So we removed the cost, particularly because it was in the face of a crisis and there was so much going on. And we entered into a public-private partnership with the government of Anguilla at no cost to them, but more of a service to the community to develop the platform. So I'm going to go ahead really briefly and share my screen and kind of explain what we have going on in the platform. So one of the first things you'll see, we have the home page, beautiful picture of my home country. This is Anguilla, and that is St. Martin in the back. But mental health is really important. And so we wanted to ensure that persons had access to the hotline for mental health here on the island to get the assistance they needed if they were facing a challenge. We also wanted to ensure that front and center was the information related to the status of COVID on the island. So knowing what coronavirus is, what COVID is, and then what is the status in Anguilla. So proud again to say that we have no active cases, and we have 3 recovered cases. In addition to that, we wanted to keep persons abreast of any new updates from the Minister of Health and other ministers of government. And we divided the site into individual sections. So we have healthcare with all the news related to healthcare and tips here, the hotline if you need help. You have information on employment, because this is obviously a major consideration. So many people, more than half of our population has been impacted with the loss of jobs. And so we wanted to ensure persons had access to that information. In addition to that, education. You know, kids are out of schools. How is it that the education department is responding to that? So everything really, travel and tourism, you know, our economy is a tourism-based economy, and our arrivals have come to a halt at zero. You know, we have, the borders are closed, and so persons can't get into the island. So people need information on what's going on with travel and tourism. What is the status of our airport facilities? What is the status of our events and our festivals? And then things like price gouging, where vendors may perhaps take advantage of the situation. We wanted to ensure that the government's position on that was clear, that the public had access to the information they needed to take action in the event someone was abusing the system. The status of food supplies on the island, the status of cargo movements, information on what are the financial institutions doing. Many of them are providing different loans and what's not. And then for your utilities, you know, your power suppliers, your telecommunications, water, we wanted to provide access to all of that information and ensure people, I'm going to stop the screen share briefly here, and ensure people had access to the information they needed, again, to make informed decisions. So what developing the platform with the government has done, and with all of these individual ministries, well, of course, it's been a lot of work. But what it has done is that it has given the public a source of trusted information, and it's presenting that information on a mobile optimized platform that is both modern and user-friendly and fast. I mean, can you imagine having to fight a website to get access to life-saving information? You know, that was not going to be appropriate for us. And so it was important that the user experience was top-notch, was really high level. The Beat COVID-19 site has really helped the government of Anguilla to control the conversation around COVID-19 on the island. It's helped them to control the conversation, to dismiss a lot of the fake news and false information that's out there, to where it's really down to, if not little, none. And it's empowered our people. It's empowered them with the truth and the access to the information that they need to make smart decisions and choices. And I think that all of that, combined with the efforts of our government, has today put us in the position where we can say that we're COVID free and we are returning to a space of normalcy. I think for us, what we're very excited about as a next step is our agency's partnership with the Island Resilience Partnership and March for Science. We're working to develop similar platforms for other island governments around the world in their fight against COVID-19. And we're looking at new ideas to grow the platform to further address the evolving needs of island nations. And again, we're doing this at no cost to governments, because, you know, initially, I think the conversation was around, okay, what's going on in healthcare and how do I get access to this information? But then another conversation is employment, as I shared with you guys. And I'll jump back really quickly to my screen share. How am I looking at time, Francisco? I don't want to run out.
I can give you 2 more minutes if you want.
Okay, perfect.
But not more.
Nice. Okay, good. I'm almost there. But what we did was, if you see on the site, we've been, again, completely updating all the time. So we have the timeline where you have access to where the country is today and where we started. But we also created a section now, working closely now with the Ministry of Labor, for unemployment, because a lot of persons, a lot of individuals are affected by unemployment. And so we created a element on the site, a feature on the site, where you can come in and again, enter all of your information and apply to actually receive, I'm just going through it very quickly, but you can apply to receive the government's unemployment benefit. And that's really powerful, because in the past, Anguilla, in the past in Anguilla, we would handle these things with paper and pen, you know, but now to give persons the opportunity to go to a website and complete all of that information in a matter of minutes, it's really powerful. I am extremely thrilled, again, to be a part of this discussion, not just to share what we've done, but also to hear from you guys in the community. It's over 390 persons online right now, to hear from you guys in the community about how we can build on what we've created. We are very committed to providing this service and this platform to islands around the world, and conversations like these with Island Innovation, this panel, and the participants, they help us to move that mission forward. So thank you, James, and thank you, Francisco, and that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Fascinating presentation, and thank you again. I will now give the floor to our last speaker, but just before I give him the floor, I'm seeing in the Q&A box that you are putting a lot of questions. I'll do my best to capture them in clusters if you want. I also see, and thank you so much already to the speakers for answering some of the questions already. That is also absolutely great. Just one thing for participants that have raised their hands. If you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A box. With more than 400 participants, as much as I would love to hear you all, it's just logistically impossible. So do please, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A box, and I'll do my best to raise those issues. So our last speaker is Daniel Trigg. He is the president of the Lanzarote Business and Residents Association in the Canary Islands. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's been a pleasure listening to everybody speaking from around the world. Obviously here at the Lanzarote, well, I'm speaking from Lanzarote, we've got 8 Canary Islands, 7 main Canary Islands, and the Lanzarote Business Association is an organisation that represents children all the way through to retirees, including businesses. So we sort of cover a wide-ranging part of the community. I think that the Canary Islands are in a unique position regarding islands as such. We are part of mainland Spain. We have access to a lot of financial help, and also we're part of the European Union. Now, one of the things that the Canary Islands have been able to have is we have had massive infrastructure projects financed by the European Union and mainland Spain, regarding hospitals, transport facilities, regarding ports, airports, and everything that you can imagine, we are being provided for by our central government and the European Union. So the island went from having 450,000 people here in a calendar month to having 150,000 people. So our facilities, the hospitals, the private clinics, the food supply chains are used to dealing with 450 people in any one go. So therefore, by reducing that down to 150,000 people, we've suddenly got a surplus of services during the lockdown period. So we've still got everything coming in. We've still got more than enough supply for electricity, water, general amenities. Our hospitals have been reduced in their necessity, and also our capacity at the hospital. Currently, we've got no new cases. We've got 11 cases registered that are at home, and we are gradually bringing that amount down. I'm just going to check exactly what the number of cases are currently to give you that idea, but we're looking at very, very few now here in Lanzarote and in the Canary Islands in general. But in Lanzarote, we have an overall of around about 4.5 million tourists a year. And the other Canary Islands, the bigger ones, Gran Canaria, around about 5.5. Tenerife has around about 6.5, and Fuerteventura has about 2.5 million people a year that visit us. And now that doesn't include people that move between the mainland and the other Canary Islands for tourist purposes, because they're not counted as international visitors. So I think that the whole way that our tourism is set up in the Canary Islands, we're able to deal with this outbreak of COVID-19 very successfully. There are questions going forward that needs to be asked of how could we have dealt with it better. Our economy is very robust, and it's because we have a massive fire in the Canary Islands, or moved to the Canary Islands to set up businesses. So, and this is an ongoing cycle. So people retire to the Canary Islands, they've got access to public services free of charge because they're European citizens. So they bring capital and they invest locally. So our economy is not just solely tourism. It has different forms of tourism. A lot of people buy second homes. For example, in Lanzarote, the estimated amount is 25,000 homes are second homes, holiday homes that people have invested in here in Lanzarote. Now, we're one of the smaller islands, or let's say the third largest out of the 3 biggest. So on the other islands, they also have that investment. So the question for us going forward and how we can cope with COVID-19 and how our economy is going to be affected, I think is a little bit different. We do know the demand is there for when it is safe to travel to do so. The Canarian government, obviously Spain is made up of individual states. So the Canary Islands state is trying to find a way of opening up our economy. The fact is, if we don't open up our economy to tourism safely, we are going to suffer extreme damage going forward. Extreme damage, because that is it is the only form of income for the Canary Islands. The government has put in place lots of help packages, financial packages, incentives, government-backed bank loans, but they're all just pushing it for further down the line to be paid. So even the tax breaks that we've received, they still have to be paid further down the line. So when they do their strategic planning, they must take into account that majority of the help that people businesses are receiving now are going to have to be paid back later on. Another one of the measures that the government has put in place is a system called the ERTE, E-R-T-E, where people have been put onto a temporary suspension of their contract and they are being paid by the government. But as soon as the state of the alarm is lifted, then companies should take them employees back on. But if we don't have any holiday makers, there will be no demand for that workforce. So they are having to look at how it's going to work going forward. And one of the other problems that we've suffered with COVID-19 here in the Canaries is that all public information has been in one language and one language only. Now in Lanzarote, there's around about 25,000 population who do not speak Spanish, or their Spanish is limited. So as an association, we have been translating all that information and providing it for tourists who have not been able to leave, which are very, very few, and local residents who also don't speak Spanish. So going forward, one of the main things for the Canary Islands is going to be, unless that part of the population is included in the exit strategy, it's going to be very difficult to get our economy up and running very quickly. So that's the exit strategy. You need to have a comprehensive project and program that will include all of the population to be able to move forward, including them people that own second homes here, who are a massive part of the economy. So if we can create a database promotional platform that include all of them residents that live here already and have businesses, and those that have second homes, we can have an injection of capital into our economy that is going to be vitally needed in the upcoming months. And I do think that the answers lie in a joint effort between government, private business, and individuals to provide a safety net, a health passport, which was mentioned before, where people are tested prior to travel, and tested on arrival, and also tested on departure. I don't see there being any other way moving forward until we have some form of testing and tracing so that tourism can flow freely and easily. And our Canarian health system in the Canaries has not been overwhelmed at any point in time, because we are built to deal with them 15 to 20 million tourists a year that the Canary Islands are receiving. So I think going forward, we will be able to provide a solid and a safe destination, but only when tour operators, airlines, and our local governments are able to provide the adequate testing. That is my feeling going forward, and I believe that the future will be the continuing investment of our retirees that are moving here. This is going to be a crucial part, because they come here with money, they buy property, they invest it, they spend it in the local economy, and we're looking at a floating population of around about 10,000 in Lanzarote. So that's crucial. and then also the investment into our industry and business, which a lot of people set up and work from home here in the Canary Islands because it is part of the European Union and it gives them access to the marketplace. This is a vital part. And then those people that have second homes, you know, I think that's the main thing of here in Lanzarote and the Canary Islands. I think we're privileged, and I don't think a lot of people in the Canaries realize we're in a privileged position. We have all the amenities of the European Union, all the facilities of the European Union, all the environmental protections of the European Union, and yet we've been able to shut our economy down, keep our population safe, and we haven't been completely affected yet. And our recovery process will be better than other destinations because of our privileged status. But our population or the foreign population is not being included in the exit strategy. And for me, that will be a major mistake.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you very much to all the speakers. I encourage them to join us now with their videos on for the rest of the webinar. We now have 20 minutes. There's a lot of questions on the Q&A, even more probably on the chat. I will move immediately to ask some questions, which I think can be clustered around 3 main areas, a lot of which are actually interrelated. The first is the ongoing health, if you want, response. So how do we deal with the crisis? And there were questions about masks, about what do we do in airports, even Daniel mentioned test and tracing. A second set of questions very much focuses on rethinking the economy, and there was a lot of emphasis from practically every speaker on whether we can go back to tourism as it once was, or do we need to rethink it in some way? And there are some questions from the participants along those lines. And the last cluster of questions are about the relationship between this possible life post-COVID, new post-COVID life, and also the environment, and whether there is a link on some environmental aspects. But I hope you don't mind if I start with the minister, with Minister Qujaukitsoq. And I ask you, Greenland has been, you mentioned, but also in general media, has been praised for its efforts. And I was wondering whether precisely maybe on the health aspect going forward, as I mentioned at the beginning, although there are successes, it's still quite fragile. So what are the aspects that, in terms of stuff that we hear all the time, such as masks, such as physical distancing in the airports? There were participants like Didier, Kate, there were a lot of people who asked questions like this. So can I give you the floor? And before I give you the floor, we do not have a lot of time, so I will try to make questions very short and punchy if I can, but I will also ask all of you to react shortly in order to get as many questions as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. We have the similar obstacles and restrictions as you have. We have demands for wearing masks, and we have restrictions in how many people that can gather publicly and in businesses, in buses, etc. So all these restrictions that you have also apply in Greenland. So we impose the same restrictions and the social distancing measures to avoid the spread of the COVID-19. So Greenland is no exception in that regard.
Thank you very much, Minister. I would like to now move to this other cluster of questions, and here I do open it to all the participants. I would love to hear Greenland, from the Maldives, from the Canary Islands, from Anguilla if possible. But we had participants such as Rooney talking about structural economic measures in times of recession, others focusing on specific measures for small island development states, Raaidh talking about universal basic income. I think the question can be really captured as moving ahead. So, okay, we are we are in a crisis. We're slowly starting to relaxing, but what we really have to also look is looking ahead. From an economic perspective, what are the main measures that can, we were talking about this before, that can really give hope to the people on your islands? And I'm happy for anybody of the speakers to start asking answer that specific question. Yes, Tahirah.
Okay, thank you. I'll just share very briefly that one of the initiatives that we're moving forward here in Anguilla is to host a number of economic development sessions between the private sector and the key government stakeholders, just to start having conversations around what are some of the critical challenges you're facing individual to your industry, and really dividing them up. Fishing, you have persons in the directly in tourism, whether it's accommodations and transportation. What are some of the challenges you're facing, and then what are some of the opportunities for the government to assist you? So I'm always going to be an advocate for public-private partnerships, and I think that starts with discussions of that nature, bringing persons to the table and saying, how do we collaborate? And governments taking the lead on that. So we're hoping to begin rolling those out in Anguilla, if not next week, the week after. We're working on that right now.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else from the speakers who want to add something on this specific economic measure or package that can really give that hope, that much needed hope to people in this crisis?
I can mention what currently the Canary Islands are doing. The Canary Islands have basically guaranteed self-employed people 80% of their salaries, and then it was back to, the central government guaranteed 80% of the self-employed, not salaries, minimum contribution. Canary Islands made it up with 20%. And then also that the government has guaranteed employees 70% of their salaries. And then they've got the government-backed loan scheme that is also providing liquidity. But one of the things that we are noticing is that Spain is not very keen on public-private enterprise. They are very, very much, the government things are government responsibilities and private sector is private sector. But they are not, they are working in partnership with certain sectors of the community. And as I said before, this is where I think the mistake will happen. The Canary Islands have been successful, majorly successful, because it has an island of shopkeepers is a phrase that I like to use. Lots of small individuals that contribute partly to that economy. So having lots of small businesses are sometimes better than having just one big business. If that one big business goes out of business, thousands of people lose their jobs. It's very rare, and this is one of them rare occasions, that all them small businesses stop at the same time. Now, one of the questions that you raised before was, are the government looking at how are we going to come out of this crisis, change the type of tourism that they were having? And something that was concerning the other day was the minister or the president of our island said during this crisis last week that maybe it's the time for mass tourism to change going forward. Whether we agree or we don't agree on that factor, I think that is a judgment that shouldn't be said now when there are thousands of people unemployed with very little income who could look at 20 years worth of work being lost. So I think that the government measures that they're bringing in place, for example, our tourism board, our island tourism board, is an independent public company that is formed of the 7 town halls and the island government, plus small business or businesses that contribute to that, who then subsidize airlines and air companies to travel to Lanzarote. But they are only interested in big package companies that can fill a hotel that may take 200 or 300 people. Now, I'm not saying that that is not needed, but I'm saying that the Canary Islands rely on a mixed form of tourism, independent travelers as well as package holidays. And if they use all their economical resources solely to encourage package holidays and not to encourage that independent traveler, then them small businesses who rely on that independent traveler, who make up a large part of the Canary Islands' real economy, will not be able to survive.
I will come back to you, Daniel, in just a second, but I'll give first the floor to the minister and then to Mohamed. And I also have a specific question from a participant for Mohamed in this context. Minister.
Thank you. I think the COVID-19 crisis also have proved the necessity to diversify our economy. It's important to emphasize the need to diversifying the revenues that we get. We have been very dependent on fishery alone, but the fishery is as volatile as anything. So we are trying to develop our mining industry to strengthen our job creation and to create tax and new jobs and to generate revenues from the mining sector. And I think the focus on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are also of great importance in this crisis because they pose a long list of to-do on how we can improve our public service sector, but also to improve the living conditions of the people in our country. I think the private-public partnership schemes are very important, and this crisis has proven the necessity to have this partnership, which is important if we are to contain and to fight the spreading of a contagious disease like COVID-19. So I think it's important to emphasize the SDGs in this matter, regardless of how long the COVID-19 crisis might occur. We need to act instead of wait or thinking of the renewables, etc. So I think the crisis has come at the very right time for us to restructure our prioritizing of the funds that is available for all of us.
Thank you very much, Minister. And the Sustainable Development Goals is actually something that can almost operate as a glue in this crisis. Mohamed, there was a question from a participant, from Charlie, who was actually commenting, and I think this could apply not just to Maldives, but possibly even to countries in the Caribbean islands of the Caribbean, and potentially also the Canary Islands. All the scenarios that you were mentioning, according to other participants, also may be slightly optimistic. And the question from Charlie was, well, what happens in an island economy, in an island like the Maldives, if there's an extended time without tourism? And I think this is something that a lot of people are thinking. We want to ease the lockdown. We want to get people out. There were comments from the Seychelles, comments from other places. But what if we can't? What if we can't? What if we do have a summer without tourists? We're talking with colleagues in Croatia, and they're saying, look, this summer is out. There's a gap year. And on some Scottish islands as well, I've heard the same thing. So just briefly, Mohamed, what would be the scenario in the Maldives if, God forbid, there's just nobody can get there?
Yes, thank you. Definitely that will be the worst scenario, and that will be something that is really unexpected. But as I have said, that we are working quite hard. We are working together with the industry, the whole of the economy, to not have that scenario to the Maldives. And the presentation also and the information that I have been provided, the information, the data, which we have been continuously getting from the industry. And recently, even 2-3 days back, I have been speaking with the president of the Guest House Association, and they have clearly mentioned that they have started receiving reservations and requests for the upcoming November. So, and we have seen this opening up in the Asian region. For example, last Monday, Malaysia was open partially. So we definitely, even in the Maldives, we will, I believe that the government will not open altogether 100%. We have to open partially on phase by phase. So by the time the tourist arrivals, as I have mentioned, for the November season, we will be able to achieve this target, and then come to a position where we will be able to have international travelers to welcome the country. So I think, okay, the scenario might be dragging, but that will be unacceptable, and nobody in the Maldives would even dream of a situation like that. That will be the worst of its situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohamed. So we only have 10 more minutes, and I have a specific question that starts bringing in the last two clusters, the economy, the tourism, but also the environment. There was a comment from a participant, from Suzanne, and which is echoed by Vittus. So what Suzanne is talking about, literally her words are, look out and embrace the opportunity to learn lessons and create an environmentally friendly economy. And there were several other questions along these lines. We even had Nellie Payton from Thomson Reuters, who was even bringing the link within climate change and the response to the pandemic. She even had the question, which could be a double-edged sword in a way. Could there be positive aspects to the drop in visitors? She asks. So I put these to you. There was another question from Danielle about the impact of COVID-19 on water availability on islands. If we ask everybody to wash their hands even more, in some islands that have droughts or water scarcity, that can be an issue. So there are a plethora of possible questions. I won't ask all of them, but the one question I would ask, and maybe I'll ask Tahirah first, from her experience in Anguilla, can we have more environmentally friendly, more resilient, as Vittus asks, tourism sector, economy? Daniel clarified that once you dig into a society like Lanzarote, things are much more complex than one could think from the outside. And even the tourism sector is much more varied and probably should be kept much more varied than just one faceted. So I'll stop there and I'll ask Tahirah first, and then the other speakers can jump in. Resilient future, tourism that is more sustainable, more environmentally friendly. Is that a possibility? How do we get there? Should we aim for that? Tahirah. Tahirah, you're muted. Tahirah.
I apologize. I was speaking and I was muted. Okay. No, I was just reiterating that yes, resilience and ensuring that whatever we're doing in the development of our tourism industry is sustainable in the long run. COVID has really forced us to rethink a lot of things. I know, we don't have an issue when it comes to access to the resources we need to produce energy and what's not, but I know that it has forced us, when we look at the context that we're in, where we have zero tourism arrivals and where you have such a large percentage of your population depending on tourism to be able to eat and pay bills, it really forces you to think about, how do we diversify our economy? How do we leverage the resources we have around us, whether it's the sun or the wind or the water, to develop a more sustainable economy on our island, even beyond tourism. So I think that would be my answer to that, if that answers your question.
Thank you very much. Daniel, maybe you want to jump in?
Yes, please. I actually think that the COVID-19 will have a devastating effect on the environment. And the reason why is we have been spending a lot of money here in the Canary Islands on education and the young, teaching them about the environment, recycling, using renewable energies, conserving water, and through associations and local cultural organizations over the last 5 years especially, a lot of money has gone into preparing the next generation of businesses and business owners and children, and even the older generation that are already in, that this is an important part of going forward within a tourism industry. And the Canary Islands have been pioneering many areas. One of the islands, as you may know, is completely self-sufficient on renewables. It doesn't use any fossil fuels for its energy. The Canary Islands in general by 2030 are looking to increase the renewables even higher. But this is driven by the amount of money that is being injected into our education system. Now, if we have no tourism, we have no income. If we have no income, then we can't educate our population on what is the best way forward. And if we can't put food on the table and we can't provide them with a stable environment, then they will, the first thing is not going to be about saving the environment. The first thing they're going to be thinking about is how they can provide for their families. So in the Canary Islands, I think our situation is different again. The mass tourism is actually in long term leading to more sustainable tourism, a more sustainable environment, because we're pumping that money into education. I can give you a classic example. I'm also the chairman of a small football club here in Lanzarote, and I've got 250 footballers going from the age of 4 all the way up to my first team. Now, at the younger age, because we get government subsidies, we're able to teach children about bringing their water bottles to the football club, filling them up to not use renewable plastics, and teaching them how to be environmentally friendly. Now, currently, them programs are backed by government finance. Now, they've already told us that the second part of 2020 for the upcoming season, all them budgets are going to go. So it is important, if we're going to have a sustainable environment, that we don't cut back on the education of the next generation to provide that for us. And I think that that matters. So tourism, it needs a balance going forward. It is going to have a massive impact on the environment in our case if we don't continue with the volumes of tourism, because we won't be able to educate the next generation.
Thank you very much, Daniel. We don't have a lot of time, but I would kindly ask Minister Qujaukitsoq and Mohamed maybe to say, if they want, just 1 or 2 words on this last conundrum on can we move forward, can we have even a better future, but at the same time going in a more resilient, more sustainable way.
The COVID-19 crisis is posing a threat to our economy, like any other country, I guess, and I suppose Greenland is no exception, that the crisis will hit us hard, regardless of whether if it's tourism, industry, or other branches for that sake. It's going to hit Greenland as hard as any other country. So it is a very clear objective for the government of Greenland to emphasize the necessity of a green economy. The green economy is something that we have emphasized long and been focusing on how we can improve the use of fossil fuel consumption, and by covering environmental clean energy like the hydropower, wind energy, solar cells, etc. But Greenland has also been hit hard by the climate change due to the severity of the decline of our ice. So Greenland is no exception in regards to all the changes that we are facing of warmer climate. So the emphasis on is therefore on a more sustainable development, not only in economy, but in general, how we consume food and goods, etc. The way of living is important. But to our vulnerability is very much based on our infrastructure and our energy sector, but also our industries. So there is a need for diversification in all regards. So Greenland is no exception.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm aware that the webinar should finish at 6:30, so I'm very sorry, Mohamed, but I know James wants to just say a few words at the end as well, so I will draw it to an end from our side, and then I'll give James the floor. I just want to add 2 quick things which come very much more from the UK and Scottish context, which may be of interest to people from islands elsewhere. Going back to where we are now, we are going through the phase one, if you want to call it, at least in the UK. We're still in the crisis, we're still in lockdown, but clearly we're talking about relaxing the lockdown. And what you're seeing in England, for example, is using an island, the Isle of Wight, to test how a specific response using an app, the National Health Service app, can work. And at the same time, there's a place-based approach being considered as, look, if things are not so bad in some areas of the UK, and this is happening in Italy, I'm sure also in Spain, there's this conversation, could some areas not open up a little bit earlier? Could schools not reopen a little bit earlier? And some islands and area of islands have been considered as areas where relaxation could happen before or in a slightly different pace. And this is a conversation to have, but it's also raising some concerns because as I started the conversation, some islands and most islands are still very fragile. So if you open them too soon, there could be a knock-off effect. Going back to the global, I'll finish with a participant called Rooney asked, all of these great experiences, we heard from Anguilla, from the Canary Islands, from the Maldives, from Greenland, what can be used to bring them all together? And a lot of you will know, and the minister mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, there is such a thing called the United Nations Local 2030 Island Hub, which is managed and hosted by GLISPA, the Global Island Partnership, and Hawaii Green Growth. And that really, I think, serves this purpose, in the context, especially of sustainability, to bring in the island experiences. And both myself and James at Island Innovation, we would be happy to put you in touch with the UN Local 2030 Island Hub. I leave it to that and I give the floor back to James, but I just would like to thank all the participants. I can see that there's still 274, and this is just a testament to how absolutely interesting the speakers have been. And I also would like to thank all of them for contributing to this webinar. James.
Thank you so much, Francesco, and to all the speakers for that. I've got to say that not only was the chat blowing up, but I was getting WhatsApp messages, LinkedIn messages, Facebook messages from all different people who were attending this and just saying how happy they were and how great this is. And I think it's so interesting. I mean, we have 3 warmer islands, 1 very cold island, different continents, different industries, although tourism is a commonality on all of them, but there were some clear parallels in what was being experienced in all corners of the world, and this sense of islandness being connected. I think for our goal as Island Innovation is really to be able to, I like to say digital bridges, build digital bridges between these islands to connect them, share best practices, and we've seen good practices and good conversations happening from all of the islands here, as well as the geographic separation. I think there's also a political separation here. I mean, the Maldives is an independent country. Anguilla and Greenland are both officially territories of European countries, and Lanzarote is part of an autonomous region of Spain as well. And so how do we create ways for these different political statuses to also be able to interact meaningfully? Because often they have more in common with each other than they do with their mainlands, for want of a better word. And I think we've shown that's possible to do to here. And finally, with bringing together government representatives, private sector, academia, NGOs, as we've done, we need that collaboration across different sectors, whether it's on sustainability or in this new crisis that we're facing. And so if this is interesting to you, I'd encourage you to go to virtualislandsummit.com, check out the summit that we'll be hosting in September. Last year we had over 4,000 people. This year we're anticipating 10,000 island participants from around the world joining this summit to discuss everything from water to electric vehicles to journalism to good governance, and we'll hope to see you all there. Thank you so much for participating. We'll also, I've had a lot of requests asking for the video, for slides. Hopefully Mohamed will be able to share your slides with the participants, and we'll definitely share this recording with all of you and a short report on this session and the future ones. Next week at the same time, we'll be having a specific session on the Caribbean, and the week after on Jamaica. Now, even if you're not from those regions, would really encourage you to attend them and participate in those, because as you've seen, the conversations are just as applicable. And moving forward, I'm sure we'll be looking at other regions and try and do some sessions that also make sense for the Asia Pacific time zone as well. So we'll leave it there. Please keep an eye out for the email that will be following up with the report. Make sure if you want to continue the excellent conversation that was going on in the chat, please join the LinkedIn and Facebook group. We'll include those links in the follow-up as well. A big thank you to Francesco Sindico for hosting this. You did a fantastic job. Thank you to Minister Qujaukitsoq and Tahirah Banks, Daniel Trigg, Mohamed, Raaidh. You've all done a really impressive job, and really thanks you for having. So we'll leave it there. We'll be in touch. Stay safe, and
thank you.
that's for everything. Thank you.